My name is Julius Robert Oppenheimer. I was born on the 22nd of April, 1904 in New York City. People usually called me Robert, and later on, most knew me as J. Robert Oppenheimer. I grew up in a wealthy Jewish family. My dad, Julius, came to the U.S. from Germany in 1888. He was only 17 when he left, and he didn't have much money. But he worked hard and eventually became a successful textile executive in Manhattan by the time I was born. My mom's name was Ella Friedman. She was born in New York in 1870 to a family of German Jews. She was an artist, a painter, and she passed on to me a love for beauty and deep thoughts about the universe. I wasn't an only child. 8 years after me, in 1912, my younger brother Frank was born. He grew up to be a physicist too. My childhood was pretty comfortable. By the time I was in school, my family was living in a fancy apartment on West 88th Street in Manhattan. It looked out over the Central Park Reservoir. We had real paintings by artists like Vincent van Gogh and Pablo Picasso hanging on the walls. I went to the Ethical Culture School and later the Alcuin Preparatory School, some of the best schools in New York at the time. When I was just 5 years old, I already loved rocks and minerals. I got that from my German grandfather. I was so into it that when I was 11, I joined the Mineralogical Club of New York City. Not many kids my age could say that. In school, I was always ahead. I finished Alcuin faster than most students, skipping grades and wrapping things up in less than the usual time. At first, I was into chemistry, but soon I found myself pulled toward physics. That's when I really started to find my path. In 1922, at age 18, I started at Harvard University. I planned to major in chemistry, but physics won me over. Still, my love for chemistry helped me later when science became more divided into special fields. At Harvard, I met Professor Percy Bridgman. He was an experimental physicist and really opened my eyes to what physics could be. But I didn't just focus on science. Back then, Harvard students studied all kinds of things. I read a lot of history, Greek, and Latin. I spent most of my time in the library, reading everything I could. I even went to more classes than I needed. In the end, I graduated in 1925, after just 3 years, with a Bachelor of Arts degree, summa cum laude. Even before I finished at Harvard, I got accepted to study physics at Cambridge University in England. From the fall of 1925 to the summer of 1926, I was there learning under Lord Ernest Rutherford, one of the biggest names in nuclear physics. He had discovered nuclear half-life and radiation, and he even won a Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1908. As my first year at Cambridge ended, I got an offer from Max Born, a well-known physicist in Germany, to study with him at the University of Göttingen. I said yes. There, I met other rising scientists, people like Werner Heisenberg, Enrico Fermi, and Edward Teller, many of whom I'd later work with during World War II. By the spring of 1927, I earned my PhD in physics less than a year after arriving in Göttingen. James Franck, one of my examiners and a Nobel Prize winner himself, joked that I was so confident during the exam that it felt like I was the one questioning him. One of my biggest accomplishments at that time was a paper I wrote with Max Born on the quantum theory of molecules. Today, it's called the Born-Oppenheimer approximation. It helped scientists understand how atoms inside molecules move differently, especially how heavy nuclei stay still while light electrons move more easily. That idea became really important for physics and chemistry. Even though I got my PhD at just 23, I wasn't a typical genius. I was kind of weird. Some people thought I was arrogant. Others thought I was shy. The truth is, I was a bit of both. I could be outgoing one moment and super withdrawn the next. I also smoked constantly, which didn't help my health later on. People around me said I had a strange mix of confidence and insecurity. Sometimes I made bad choices and said things I shouldn't have. Once, back at Cambridge, I was so upset with one of my professors that I tried to poison an apple and leave it in his office. I'm not proud of that. I ended up taking a break and going to France. It was a weird time. One of my friends back then said I once tried to strangle him when he told me he was getting married. I guess I didn't handle emotions very well. Under all the science and seriousness, I was a guy who didn't always know how to deal with people. But there was also a side of me that loved big questions. I got really into Eastern philosophy, Hinduism, Confucianism, and even learned Sanskrit just so I could read ancient Hindu texts in their original form. To me, science wasn't just about math or numbers. It was about understanding the mysteries of the universe. After finishing up my studies in Europe, I headed back to the United States. I had short fellowships at Harvard and Caltech. I also kept traveling back to Europe for short stints, working in places like Leiden in the Netherlands and Zurich in Switzerland, places where Einstein had done some of his best work. It was in Leiden that I got the nickname Oppie. It came from how my name sounded in Dutch. By 1929, I finally settled back in the US for good. I took 2 teaching jobs, one at the University of California, Berkeley, and the other at Caltech in Pasadena. For more than a decade, I split my time between the two, teaching in the fall and winter at Berkeley, and heading to Caltech in the spring. Those years were busy but exciting. I started training some of the brightest young physicists in America. I created a kind of research school where we dove deep into the toughest questions in theoretical physics. My students and I worked together every day, bouncing ideas off each other, not just about science, but also about things like Plato and Sanskrit. We wanted to understand the world, not just measure it. In fact, I got so wrapped up in all this that I didn't even know about the Wall Street crash of 1929 until months after it happened. That's how disconnected I was from the real world sometimes. Still, the work we did was groundbreaking. In 1930, I wrote a paper that predicted the existence of the positron, an antiparticle of the electron. A couple of years later, one of my students at Caltech, Carl David Anderson, actually discovered it. I also worked with Wendell Furry to figure out how electrons and positrons interact. But one of my most important projects was with Melba Phillips, one of the few women in physics at the time. Together, in 1935, we came up with what's now called the Oppenheimer-Phillips process. It showed how certain nuclear reactions could happen more easily than scientists thought. That helped us understand radioactivity and nuclear fusion better. All this work put California on the map as a major center for theoretical physics, and I was proud to be part of that. Around that time, my personal life got kind of messy. In the late 1920s, I was diagnosed with a mild case of tuberculosis. Back then, people thought dry desert air could help, so I started spending time in Arizona and New Mexico. I ended up buying a ranch in New Mexico, and it became one of my favorite places to escape to. It was quiet, open, and felt far away from everything. In the mid-1930s, I met Jean Tatlock. She was a psychiatry student, and also the daughter of a famous literature professor. Jean was smart, intense, and struggling with a lot inside. We started a relationship, and even though it was passionate, it wasn't easy. She battled depression and had a lot of inner conflict. We were on and off for years, even after I met someone else. That someone else was Kitty Harrison. She was a botanist and also studied physics at Caltech. In 1940, she divorced her second husband, and the very next day, she married me. It all happened really fast. She was already pregnant when we got married, and in May 1941, our son Peter was born. A few years later, in 1944, our daughter Catherine came along. I still cared about Jean, though. We stayed in touch for a while, even after I was married. Sadly, in January 1944, she took her own life. It hit me hard. Meanwhile, the world was falling apart. In Europe, the Nazis had taken power in Germany in 1933. Their leader, Adolf Hitler, was filled with hatred, especially for Jewish people. Even though I wasn't a religious Jew, I still felt the fear and tension that came with being Jewish in that time. I started donating part of my salary, about 3%, to help Jewish refugees escape Germany. By the late 1930s, things got worse. Germany took over Austria and then Czechoslovakia. Then, in September 1939, they invaded Poland. That's when World War II officially began. Britain and France declared war on Germany. But in America, most people still didn't want to get involved. President Roosevelt was helping the Allies by sending supplies, but the U.S. stayed neutral, at least until everything changed in December 1941. That was when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December without warning. They also attacked the Philippines and other American territories. In just a few days, the United States was at war, not just with Japan, but with Germany and Italy too. The whole world was now caught in a massive war, and that's when my life changed forever. I was about to be pulled into something that would change science, war, and the future of humanity. Right after the US joined the war, something big started happening in the world of science. People were afraid that Nazi Germany was working on building a powerful new weapon, a bomb based on nuclear fission. This idea wasn't just science fiction. Scientists in Germany had already split the atom back in 1938. Everyone knew what that could mean. In August 1939, even before the war began, two scientists, Leo Szilard and Albert Einstein, sent a letter to President Roosevelt. They warned him that Germany might be trying to build an atomic bomb. At first, not much happened. But after Pearl Harbor, things got serious. In 1942, the U.S. government created a secret research program called the Manhattan Project. Its goal was to build the first atomic bomb before the Germans could. Eventually, over 130,000 people worked on it in places all over the country. I was asked to join the project as the head of the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. At first, I almost didn't get the job. The general in charge, Leslie Groves, wanted someone with a Nobel Prize. He thought that would impress people. But others told him I had a special talent for bringing scientists together and helping them do their best work. After we met, he decided I was the right person for the job. In early 1942, I helped pick the location for the lab. We needed somewhere remote and quiet, far from cities and secrets. We found an old-school site in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and built the lab there. The University of California helped run it, and I had control over who I hired. At its peak, over 5,000 people worked at Los Alamos. It was way more than I expected. I brought in some of the smartest scientists of the time. John Van Vleck, who had once been at Harvard with me, helped with bomb design and later won a Nobel Prize. My old friend from Berkeley, Robert Serber, came too. He even gave the bombs their nicknames: Thin Man, Little Boy, and Fat Man. Hans Bethe, another brilliant physicist, helped figure out how much material was needed to make the bombs explode. And Edward Teller, he and I had studied in Europe at the same time, joined the team as well. Teller became one of my closest collaborators at Los Alamos. We didn't have much to start with, just some theories. No one had ever built a bomb like this before. We weren't even sure what would happen when one went off. We had to guess, test, and experiment every day. I worked non-stop. Hans Bethe later said that one of my biggest strengths was how fast I could understand complex problems and keep track of all the parts of the project. I wasn't just managing things from behind a desk. I was there, in the labs, in the meetings, pushing forward with everyone else. But the stress wore me down. I lost about 20 pounds during those years. I was already thin, and by then, I weighed only about 110 pounds. Still, we kept going. Our first major design was a plutonium gun-type bomb called Thin Man, but it didn't work out. We found out that the bomb would need a huge barrel to shoot the plutonium fast enough. It was too big to fit on a plane. So in April 1944, we dropped that plan. Instead, we focused on two new designs. Little Boy, which used uranium-235 in a simpler gun-type setup, and Fat Man, an implosion-type bomb using plutonium. Fat Man was harder to build but ended up being more powerful and practical. One of the smartest decisions I made was bringing in John von Neumann, a genius mathematician. He came up with a way to shape the explosives around the bomb to make the implosion work better. That helped us use less plutonium and build a more compact bomb. By early 1945, both bomb designs were almost ready. By the time summer rolled around in 1945, we were ready to test our work. We called it the Trinity test. The bomb we were going to use was a Fat Man type, an implosion design using plutonium. We nicknamed the test bomb the Gadget. I chose the name Trinity after reading a poem by John Donne. His religious words had been stuck in my head, and somehow they felt right for the moment. We set up the test site in the middle of nowhere, a desert in New Mexico called Jornada del Muerto, which in Spanish means Journey of the Dead Man. It was remote, dry, and almost completely empty. The only building there was an old ranch house that the government had taken over a few years earlier. Because plutonium was so rare and expensive, worth billions of dollars today, we had only one shot. Everything had to go exactly right. General Groves joked that he didn't want to explain to Congress how we had just blown up all that money for nothing. We planned everything carefully. Observation points were set up about 9 kilometers away in 3 directions. People wore dark goggles to protect their eyes from the blast. Still, no one knew exactly what would happen. The morning of the test was July 16th, 1945. We stood in those shelters before dawn, waiting. I was there, along with Fermi, Teller, Bethe, and von Neumann. Everyone was tense. Some people thought the bomb might not work at all. Others were afraid it might destroy too much, maybe even ignite the atmosphere. It sounds crazy now, but back then, we really weren't sure. At 5:29 a.m., the world changed. The bomb exploded with the force of about 25,000 tons of TNT. It made a crater 1/3 of a kilometer wide. The sand underneath it melted into green glass. The shock wave was so strong it was felt nearly 100 kilometers away. We saw the fireball first, colors shifting from purple to green to orange, then turning white. A giant mushroom cloud rose 12 kilometers into the sky. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. We didn't hear the sound until 40 seconds later. Then, it hit like a giant wave. At that moment, something from the Bhagavad Gita, an ancient Hindu text, ran through my head. If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, that would be like the splendor of the Mighty One. That's what I remembered. Later, people started saying I had quoted another line, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But I didn't actually say that, at least not then. What I did feel was a mix of emotions, pride that the project had worked, awe at the power we had unlocked, and fear about what this meant for the future. Just a few weeks later, that fear became real. After the Trinity test, we knew the bomb worked. The military didn't wait long. By the end of July 1945, everything was ready to use the bombs in war. President Truman had just taken office after President Roosevelt died on the 12th of April, 1945. At the Potsdam Conference in Germany, Truman warned Japan to surrender or face prompt and utter destruction. But Japan didn't surrender. The first target was Hiroshima. On the 6th of August, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay dropped the Little Boy uranium bomb over Hiroshima. In less than a second, about 70,000 people were killed instantly. The city was flattened. Thousands more died later from burns and radiation sickness. 3 days later, on the 9th of August, another B-29 dropped the Fat Man plutonium bomb over Nagasaki. That bomb killed around 40,000 people right away. Again, the death toll climbed over time. On the 15th of August, 1945, Japan surrendered. The war was over. But the world had entered a new era, the nuclear age. I should have felt proud. The bombs had ended the war, just like we hoped. But instead, I felt something else. Guilt, sorrow, confusion. I had spent years building the weapon, and now that I'd seen what it could do, I wasn't sure it was right. I wasn't alone. Some of the scientists at Los Alamos felt the same way. We had helped win the war, but we had also opened a door that couldn't be closed. After the war, I didn't want to build bigger bombs. I wanted to control them. I believed the U.S. should be open with the world about what we had created, and we should work with other countries to stop nuclear weapons from spreading. But not everyone agreed with me. Soon, I'd find myself in the middle of a new kind of war, not one with bombs, but one with secrets, politics, and fear. That was the beginning of the Cold War. And my troubles were just getting started. After the war, I became a national figure. People called me the father of the atomic bomb. I was famous. Reporters wanted interviews. Colleges gave me awards. Even President Truman invited me to the White House. But I wasn't comfortable with all that attention. When I met President Truman in October 1945, I told him I felt like I had blood on my hands. He didn't like that. Later, I heard he told someone, "I don't want to see that crybaby ever again." Still, I tried to use my voice for something good. In 1947, I became chairman of the General Advisory Committee for the Atomic Energy Commission. It was a group of scientists meant to guide the government on nuclear issues. Then, something happened that changed everything. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested their own atomic bomb. The US was shocked. People panicked. How had they built a bomb so fast? The answer was complicated. Soviet spies had slipped into the Manhattan Project and passed information back to Russia. We didn't know it at the time, but people like Klaus Fuchs had given away our secrets. Now, the US had a decision to make. Should we build a bigger bomb, a hydrogen bomb, also called the H-bomb? Edward Teller, my old colleague from Los Alamos, wanted to build it right away. But I didn't agree. I didn't think we needed a bomb that powerful, and I worried what it would mean for the world. Our committee recommended not to rush into building it. But, in the end, President Truman said yes. The H-bomb program went forward, and Teller became one of its biggest champions. Meanwhile, things were getting darker for me. During the Red Scare, people in the US were terrified of communism. The government started investigating anyone who had once supported leftist ideas, or even just talked to people who had. I had gone to meetings in the 30s, when I was younger and trying to understand the world. I had friends who were communists, including my wife Kitty, my brother Frank, and Jean Tatlock. Even though I had never joined the Communist Party myself, I became a target. In 1954, The government held a hearing to decide if I could still be trusted with security clearance. It was brutal. They said I had lied, that I was too emotional, too political. They used my past against me. People I once worked with, like Edward Teller, testified against me. He said I was brilliant but not always trustworthy. That hurt more than I can say. In the end, they took away my clearance. I couldn't work on government projects anymore. I lost my influence, my voice, my place in the world I had helped shape. I didn't fight back much. I was tired. I had spent years giving everything I had to my country. Now my country had turned its back on me. Still, I kept teaching, writing, and thinking. In 1963, President Lyndon Johnson gave me the Enrico Fermi Award, a way of saying sorry for what had been done, but the scars stayed. After they took away my security clearance in 1954, I went back to what I loved most, teaching, reading, and thinking. I stayed at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where I had been director since 1947. Even though I had lost my government roles, I still had students and colleagues who respected me. I started to travel more. I gave lectures in Europe, talked with scientists in India, and visited old friends. I read poetry, studied philosophy, and kept thinking about the moral questions behind science. I still believed that science could help humanity, but only if people used it with wisdom. My health, though, began to fade. In late 1965, doctors found that I had throat cancer. I had smoked most of my life, sometimes as many as 100 cigarettes a day. I tried surgery and radiation, but the cancer kept coming back. In February 1967, I slipped into a coma at my home in Princeton. I died a few days later, on the 18th of February, surrounded by my family. I was 62. Some people said I died a broken man. Maybe that's partly true. I had seen the best and worst of what science could do. I had helped end a world war, but I had also helped start a new kind of fear, a fear that still lives on. Even after I was gone, people kept arguing about me. Was I a hero, a traitor, a genius, a fool? The truth is, I was just a man. I loved learning. I made mistakes, and I carried the weight of something too powerful for one person to hold alone. In December 2022, more than 50 years after my death, the U.S. government officially admitted that taking away my security clearance had been unfair. They cleared my name. I wish that had come sooner, but maybe it means the world has started to understand. I once said, in some sort of crude sense, which no vulgarity, no humor, no overstatement can quite extinguish, the physicists have known sin. That's what I believed. We crossed a line. And we can't go back. But maybe we can still choose what comes next.